Gentlemen, please, compose yourselves. This is, after all, the New Hampshire legislature, not a country fair. We have before us a proposal from Mr. Sylvester Marsh requesting permission to build a railway to the summit of Mount Washington.
Mr. Speaker, it's a crazy scheme if I ever heard one, but why not indulge the man? In fact, why only build a railway to the summit? I submit we let him build a railway to the moon.
Mount Washington is a mystical and remarkable place. Looming majestically as the Northeast's highest peak, it is the birthplace of legends and the location of one of mankind's most unique and enduring inventions, the Mount Washington Cog Railway. Today, travelers from around the globe find their way to the Cog's mountain stronghold, and once there, discover an experience that is unparalleled anywhere in the world. For a trip on the Cog Railway is not just a train ride up a mountain. It is a journey through time that has thrilled travelers for more than 120 years. Winter snows blanket New Hampshire's presidential range for nearly 6 months of the year. It is within this pristine mountain sanctuary that the Cog Railway sleeps. It waits only for the warmth of spring to melt its frozen world, giving the signal to again begin the ritual ascent to the summit. It might seem an inhospitable place to test man's puny inventions against nature's limitless strength, but it is in fact the place where Sylvester Marsh threw down his gauntlet to challenge the elements. Marsh was born in Campton, New Hampshire in 1803 and made his fortune in the meatpacking industry. Though blessed with an inventive mind, Marsh little suspected his most famous invention and claim to immortality would not come until he was nearly 60 years old. It was in August of 1857 that Marsh decided to ascend Mount Washington on foot. During this climb, he and his companion were caught in a storm and darkness fell quickly. Climbing on blindly, the exhausted men finally stumbled upon the tip-top house and there spent the night. That experience led to the creation of this machine, the world's first mountain climbing locomotive. Marsh's nearly fatal brush with the elements caused him to wonder about a safer way to climb this formidable mountain. His imaginative mind conceived a plan to ascend by steam power, using a special cog coupled with a vertical boiler. Marsh built this scale model to impress potential investors that his idea was sound. He also obtained patents for his designs, including one for the first air brake, which began to attract attention to his creation. A well-known journal, the Scientific American, published a cover story on the cog, including an artist's rendering of what the railway might look like if ever built. The popularity and fame of Mount Washington continued to spread as the opening of the carriage road in 1861 made the summit somewhat more accessible. Marsh continued the relentless, obsessive pursuit of his goal. From his initial, somewhat humiliating appearance before the legislature in 1858, through the Civil War and beyond, he never gave up. With $5,000 of his own money and $15,000 raised from investors, he formed the Mount Washington Steam Railway Company. Marsh's dream took shape. The project moved ahead step by step, with base buildings and a short trestle being built from timbers cut on location. Progress was slow. All materials had to be shipped by railroad to Littleton, some 25 miles away, and then hauled by teams of oxen to the base. In August of 1866, Marsh was able to offer demonstration runs on the first short section of track with locomotive number 1, named Hero. These runs soon convinced all involved that the railway would truly become a reality. However, it didn't take long for Hero's name to be changed forever. An early visitor took one look at the vertical boiler and smokestack and commented that it looked like a long-necked pepper sauce bottle, a common item in Victorian-era households. And so, pepper sauce was ingloriously christened. The arduous work of clearing ground for the track continued. It followed a natural ridge and a bridle path once cleared by the legendary mountain man Ethan Allen Crawford. Carving its way into the landscape, the cog moved inexorably toward completion. One by one, the voices of ridicule turned to praise as Marsh's dream came true. The world's first mountain climbing railway was precedent-setting in nearly every way. State-of-the-art technology was being created with every step as these pioneers moved ever closer to their goal. Here on Jacob's Ladder, the trestle reaches its steepest grade at an incredible 37.41%, as astounding today as it was in 1869. This man, Walter Aiken, was to play an ever-enlarging role in the Mount Washington Cog Railway. This engine, which was Aiken's version of pepper sauce, did not perform as well. It was later reconstructed and named the George Stephenson. As the trestle reached the top of Jacob's Ladder, trains began to run to that point in August of 1868. However, severe weather would prevent completion of the line until the following year. Finally, on July 3rd, 1869, the Cog Railway was finished. It took 700,000 feet of timber, 231 tons of iron, $125,000, and one man's eternal optimism to complete. Engineering, as well as the unquenchable human spirit, had combined to create this marvel of its age. As unlikely as it might once have seemed, Sylvester Marsh had built his railway to the moon. The Cog Railway fast became the brightest star in the North Country. The White Mountain region was now a destination resort area, with luxurious grand hotels, incredible natural beauty, and its one-of-a-kind rail line. It wasn't long before the world began to beat a path to the Cog's door. When the prestigious periodical Harper's Weekly ran a major feature on the Cog in August of 1869, the population at large began to hear of this extraordinary invention and majestic landscape. These journalists were among the earliest to savor firsthand the wonderment that millions would experience over the ensuing century. Harper's Weekly wrote, "On a trestle work sometimes more than 20 feet high, we seem entirely severed from the earth. The stoutest of the party looks a little pale, but we feel the firm grip of the cog upon cog, and still up we go. The horizon extends, admiration gives place to awe. There is no room in our hearts for fear. We drink in the wonder." Another of those drawn to the Cog and humbled by the grandeur of the experience was President Ulysses Grant. On August 27, 1869, Grant, along with his wife and son, ascended Mount Washington. The president seemed to gain a sense of perspective from his time on the summit. "Man seems so small when you look at the universe," he observed. Now, no trip to the North Country was complete without a journey on the Cog Railway. Walter Aiken continued to build locomotives. New coaches were ordered and business was booming. P.T. Barnum called the Cog journey the second greatest show on earth. The nation and the Cog began an era of prosperity that would carry it well into the next century. The Cog Railway was here to stay. One of the more unusual byproducts to come out of the construction process was the slide board, otherwise known as the Devil's Shingle. This simple device was little more than a plank with a rudimentary brake, and at first it just allowed workmen to spend more time on the job before making a speedy descent. Eventually, more and more adventure seekers wanted to try it, with one hearty soul making the 3-mile trip down in a mere 2 minutes and 45 seconds for an average speed of more than 60 miles an hour. Most people, however, were a bit more conservative. Among the Clouds, the world's only newspaper ever published on a mountaintop, always sent their latest edition down via the cog track. Eventually, safety considerations and a redesign of the track brought the slideboard era to a close. The Northeast's highest peak was now becoming a busy place, between the trains, the stages, the newspaper, and more. Walter Aiken and John Lyons became the new forces to be reckoned with as Sylvester Marsh became more of a figurehead. These new entrepreneurs began construction of a summit hotel to offer cog travelers overnight lodging. And once the Boston, Concord, and Montreal Railway extended a rail line to the base station, there was a direct link between the Northeast's major cities and the top of Mount Washington. One of the most enchanting aspects of the Cog Railway is that today's travelers can experience precisely the same sensations that were offered way back when. In fact, a recent commemorative celebration created a wrinkle in time of sorts as the Victorian era came back to life.
I'm very curious to see how this Sylvester Marsh's contraption is going to get us to the top myself. After you, sir. See the summit? Clear as a bell.
Today's riders are looking for the same thrills as those of yesteryear. And they get them. More importantly, today's owners and crew take responsibility for the public safety as seriously as their predecessors did.
My responsibilities now that I'm general manager, the ultimate responsibility is the safety of the operation as far as the traveling public is concerned. Trains, the tracks, the grounds. We have a scheduled maintenance program that is in effect and overseen by a number of different groups. The train crews fill out daily reports on the performance of the equipment, and that's passed along the chain of command and right down to the shop, at which time they schedule all the needed maintenance, whether big or small. The state of New Hampshire plays a role in the inspection process here at the COG, and we inspect the boilers every year, the running gear on the locomotives and coaches, and then also the track is under constant check. I would say 8 times a year a state inspector comes up and walks the track and makes recommendations. I think the most satisfying thing for me is the challenge of running the railroad and running a good operation and something the public can really enjoy.
Before the COG was passed on to today's owners, it had gone through remarkably few proprietors in its history. After the era of Marsh and Aiken, the Boston and Maine Railroad ran it, making vast improvements to the overall operation and switching fuels from wood to coal. 3 summit houses were built and burned between 1873 and 1915. But as the public kept coming, the summit kept busy. Peppersass went on the road as the Cog Railway's mechanical ambassador shortly after the turn of the century. After many travels, including being lost in Maryland for 23 years, the engine was finally brought back to New Hampshire. The idea of bringing the long-retired Peppersass out for a commemorative run in 1929 was cause for great interest among the press and public. Large crowds turned out, only to bear witness to a crash that marked the engine's last run. Eventually, Peppersass was rebuilt and put on permanent display at the base station to await the day when its whistle might again echo through the hills. The 1929 accident combined with the Great Depression to spell hard times for the Cog. When the Boston and Maine Railroad was seeking a new owner, this man, Colonel Henry Teague, was able to expand business through innovative marketing efforts in spite of the economy. Henry Teague was on a trip recruiting summer help when he met Arthur Teague, then a college senior. The two were not related, but would share an even greater bond, the love for a railway. Arthur Teague, a man destined to be the next owner, came on board. His wife, Ellen Crawford Teague, remembers him.
He always was ready at the railway. He didn't expect these men to do something he didn't do. He did it with them. He would get under the engine, he'd work with the engine, and he'd do everything that his laborers, he was a leader of men.
Together, the Teagues weathered some of the worst that Mother Nature had to offer, including the hurricane of 1938, which toppled Jacob's Ladder. At 231 miles an hour, Mount Washington has been witness to the highest winds ever recorded by man. One of Arthur Teague's most important contributions was the design and construction of sidings that would allow trains to pass one another. With 9 separate hand movements, these switches are the world's most complicated to operate, but they certainly do the job. The Cog's only major accident occurred in September 1967 when a passing hiker threw a switch that caused both engine and coach to derail. From that day forward, switching procedures were instituted which would prevent that possibility in the future. That lone accident still serves as a solemn reminder to all employees of the responsibility attached to every move they make. The Cog's current owners, Kathy and Joel Bedore and Wayne Presby, faced the same challenges from Mother Nature their predecessors had.
I think that being in partnership with Mother Nature, having to go on her every whim, realizing that on Mount Washington you can have snow any day of the year, any month of the year. It is awesome, and it makes you feel very small in relation to what it is you're supposedly in charge of, but in fact just maintaining and taking care of for posterity.
These active and involved stewards of the Cog legacy realize that only by their continued vigilance will they carry on the traditions of preservation and improvement that have already been established.
Many of our locomotives were originally built in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and the boilers and some of the other operating equipment had lasted for over 50 years. And in the last few years, we've been able to replace boilers and totally restore many of these antique pieces of operating equipment, and that's been most satisfying.
Every step of the process is reenacted by an endless line of men who are irresistibly drawn by the lure of the rails.
Once they've worked here for a season, the cog gets in their blood, and the smell of the coal, the dirt and the cinders falling in their hair, the feeling of going up and down the mountain all day long. I've seen guys dancing to the sound of the engines as they're coming down the hill, because they got kind of that rhythmic sound to the steam being let in and out of the cylinder cocks off from the bottom of the cylinder. I think that's what it is. It gets into their blood. It's the cog. It's kind of funny when you hear that little whistle and that ch-ch-ch-ch as the trains are backing down the mountain. It kind of tickles you a little bit, and you tend to smile.
These trains have been restored and kept on track by individuals who still can't help smiling when they hear that whistle. The common denominator they share is the goal to overcome day-to-day trials and tribulations and keep the train online.
I think that Sylvester Marsh had great vision. The history of the railroad from his beginning right through the present is a day-to-day finding a way. There is no place you can look something up in a book. You cannot call someone in the business next door. You need to see your problem. You need to have an innovative person to solve the problem. And innovation, I think, is one of the major things, and it makes the people who work here and the particular institution unique.
One of those modern-day innovators can be found in the person of shop foreman Mike Kendley. In his more than 15 years as a Cog Railway employee, he has performed almost every function and virtually built engines from the ground up. For trains that consume a ton of coal and 1,000 gallons of water on every trip up the mountain, routine maintenance is crucial.
The kind of work that we find ourselves doing most often would be small things, little adjustments that need to be made, is really routine maintenance. It's checking the engines for worn or broken parts, adjusting brakes, cleaning the inside of the boilers. At least every 2 weeks, because they are relatively simple, every little piece is critical. In some ways, they're simple sort of machines. All the parts have to be handmade, for one thing. There's a lot of thought that has to go into making these parts.
One of the more dramatic procedures which the men must perform make the engine appear very much like an angry dragon. This process is called a blowdown.
All clear!
It instantly releases all the pressure and water that's in the boiler. So it makes a tremendous roar and a huge cloud of steam.
Working on the same trains in the same shop that men have toiled in for more than a century gives to all who step through the doors onto the warm brick floor a sense of history.
Just walking in the shop and looking around at the old equipment and the belt-driven machinery and just the old building itself, it does give you a feeling that you're in kind of a time warp. It's all a part of history, and we're just one link in that long chain. I've crawled in and around these engines, I guess, as much as anybody. I think the most rewarding thing I find working on these engines is running day after day after day up and down the mountain, and they always seem to make it back home.
One of the reasons these trains always come home at night is men at the controls. The maze of piping, valves, and gauges inside the locomotive seem a cross between a plumbing supply store and a furnace. Since at times they appear impervious to the often hostile environment in the locomotive's cab, it seems these men must be made of fire and steam themselves.
Water level would be the major concern. On this railroad line, we have so many different grades, and at all times we have to keep the flues covered with water.
Even with the technical expertise engineer Pete Oasley must master, he hasn't lost touch with why he loves the job.
When you're young, it seems as if you're so much more aware of things that are amazing. And, you know, as you get older, the romance seems to fade away. The railroad, when I was young, was something really incredible.
It takes many years for an employee to work his way through the on-the-job training required to become an engineer. Beginning as a brakeman, a person will learn every aspect of the braking process before moving up the ladder to fireman. These engines burn all night long, and it is the responsibility of the fireman to make certain the engine has a head of steam ready in the morning. Then, all day long, it's necessary to shovel in just the right amount of coal to keep the engine operating at peak performance. Those who have traveled on the Cog Railway or have worked on it need no reminder of its unique appeal. However, more formal recognition came in 1976 when the Cog was declared a National Historic, Mechanical and Civil Engineering Landmark. With every passing year, the Cog Railway's legend and lore becomes etched ever deeper into our collective American heritage. Today, Peppersass stands as a quiet sentinel from the past, watching closely as his own descendants climb the same rails he did so long ago. Much of our awareness of this nation's history can only be found in old books and papers. How lucky we are not to have lost this tangible mechanical link to our own past. The mystique of the Cog Railway is one that captured a nation's attention during the late 1800s. Its continued operation into the 1990s has become almost as remarkable an achievement as was its initial creation. Today, as it was in the past, the Cog is only as strong as the leaders who guide it.
The historic perspective of the Cog Railway is something that just can't be escaped. There is a business operation here, but more and more anyone involved realizes that the most important thing that you have is a part of history. You are taking care of one of the most important assets that the state of New Hampshire has.
Even the normal base activities are a show in themselves. Many visitors come just to watch the trains. Others wander through the museum displays for a look at some rare mementos of the past. And some just sit by the fire in the lodge. The entire Cog operation is, in essence, a living museum, saving just one experience from being lost to time. And doing just one thing, but doing it very well. For just a little while, we can step back and imagine how it once was. There are few common experiences left we can share exactly the same way our ancestors did. Only amidst the unspoiled grandeur of these mountains can we push aside the misty curtain of the past to discover a glimpse of ourselves as we were. With all the technical advances of our modern era, the Cog Railway may be little more than a footnote of the industrial age. But in that note, we are reminded of how our dreams connect us to the past and shape the future. More than a century later, the vision of Sylvester Marsh still reaches out to us as his railway to the moon continues its journey through time.